83% of your prospects and clients researching, comparing options, evaluating pricing, and decision making is now over before you even get to talk with a particular prospect. And that's a really, really big challenge for companies that use a very traditional, old school kind of playbook. But it also opens up a huge opportunity for those that are able to get in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that you and your team, your client-facing team, are seen as the go-to experts in your space on anything and everything having to do with data center operations. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from operators like hyperscale, wholesale, colocation, edge, and modular providers, from technology and facilities companies that sell to and partner with data center operators, data center providers, construction and real estate companies, and investors in data center operators, as well as outsourced sales and marketing companies that sell to and partner with companies in and around the data center ecosystem, regardless of what your particular job function is on a GTM, on a go-to-market team. Perhaps you're the executive sponsor, maybe you're in sales, marketing, account management, product management, channel partnerships, or again, perhaps you're the orchestra conductor, the executive sponsor that is responsible for aligning everyone, getting everyone on the same page, and making sure that the collaboration works spectacularly for both the benefit of your company's needs as well as having a fantastic prospect, customer, and partner experience. So what's on the agenda for today? We're going to look at first how a data center operator can create an effective go-to-market GTM strategy. Then we'll turn our attention to how a data center power and temperature monitoring company can reach decision makers. After that, we'll look at how a data center cooling company can address market sizing challenges. After that, we will take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back after that, we'll look at how data center sales teams can create trust with a long-term approach. We'll get into how a small-scale data center with less than 100 racks can sell shared colocation services. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, we'll round out our 6 questions with how to get structured cabling decision makers on board faster, how to get to the structured cabling decision maker faster, even if the person has an entry-level job title. So let's jump right into this week's first question, which is, how can a data center operator create an effective go-to-market strategy? How does a data center operator create effective GTM, effective go-to-market strategy? It's a fantastic question, and one that we're asked several times a month over at DCSMI. It really starts with first understanding your business model. Typically, operators are in colocation or hyperscale or wholesale or some kind of edge capacity, or sometimes a mixture of all of the above. Many times, data center operators also get involved in selling managed services, network connectivity, and sometimes they're even heavily involved in telecommunications as opposed to just being the company or the point that pulls together everything into a meet-me room with access, carrier neutral, of course. So there's a lot of different ways that the data center operator business model can play out. But in order for you to come up with an effective go-to-market strategy, you need to know what kinds of clients are going to be happiest by working with your company. Are they huge enterprise clients looking for hyperscale deals? Are they small and medium-sized businesses looking for more traditional colocation? Are they running applications that are really latency sensitive, where they need to be as close to the users as possible, where edge is a big deal? Or are there needs to get up and running really quickly? And a modular solution could be the best play. So, again, this comes down to knowing who your ideal clients are. So, when we look at the logos on your homepage or we look at your case studies page, we'd ideally like to find some commonalities among who's there. Do we find commonalities with where they're geographically located? That's an interesting question just in and of itself that we're often asked to address. For data center operators, generally the larger they are, the more likely it is that they have clients that are located anywhere from a little far to very far away from where some of their facilities are. And they just happen to have clients that want to have a presence in that particular location. At the other extreme, the single location colocation operator, it's actually quite common that a huge part of their client base comes from the local community because they're trading proximity, they're trading familiarity, they're trading direct access to the ownership team for some other things that they would potentially get with a midsize or much larger operator. And then edge, of course, proximity wins over everything. So, in order to come up with an effective go to market strategy, we need to know what kinds of clients have gotten the best value from our company in the past, where we've been most successful, where they've had the best onboarding and account management kind of experience for initial value, intended value, and extended value, where the retention has been highest, where the unit economics have been strongest, where the digital word of mouth referrals have been the strongest, the most positive. All of that rolls into, okay, an ideal client profile, an ICP. And we first need to identify geographically, are they just located in the area that's closest to that particular facility? Are they located in a region that's much wider, in a particular state or province, covering a whole country or covering globally? Again, there's two possible scenarios that pop up most often, especially with co-location operators. Either a big percentage of your client base is located within a half hour to an hour drive of where your facility is, or you have clients that really could be on the other side of the planet that want to have a presence in that particular geographic market because of latency issues, because they need to be close to where their users are. So that'll help define geographically what's going on. Within the company size component, that's a big deal as well. And a lot of times when people think of size, they're thinking of the power capacity of the particular facility. So they're talking about megawatts, or in some cases, gigawatts, as we grow to these supersized facilities, or in the old days, what would have been more kilowatt kind of discussion. They're sometimes talking about square footage. They're sometimes talking about density. But when it comes to your go to market, when it comes to prospecting, lead generation, lead nurturing, sales enablement, at some point, you're going to need to normalize that ideal client profile, that target account list, down by a number of employees. There's other databases besides LinkedIn that could go based on estimated annual revenue of a particular client. But if we're talking about the kind of gold standard with this as a starting point, being able to use tools like LinkedIn, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Campaign Manager, you're going to want to standardize your targeting for your go-to-market based on the number of employee headcount for a particular company. And LinkedIn uses some pretty standardized bands of ranges of employees, starting with like 1 to 10 employees, 11 to 50, 51 to 200, 200, 201 to 500, 501 to 1,000. I think it's 1,001 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, and then 10,000 plus, or something very, very close to that. And again, this is where you can be most successful, where your clients can be most successful, where the clients are profitable, where they're big enough that they can afford your minimums, where they could potentially be large enough that they hit your sweet spot if they have expected IT needs that line up with a company in that particular industry, which we'll get to in a moment, and company size in that location. And they're not so large that they be out of your league in terms of having incredibly sophisticated compliance needs or regulatory needs or other kinds of needs that they may only be able to get from the largest of the large co-location operators on a global basis. So knowing on your go-to-market, knowing where they're located, knowing their company size is huge, as is knowing the industry, especially for data center operators at the intersection of a client's particular location And their industry or their business model or their vertical market, as it's sometimes called, it often introduces compliance requirements that pop up when it comes to data center operators. So for sure, if you have deep expertise that's made you great for clients in healthcare, then for sure you'll want to roll that into your go-to-market strategy to target healthcare companies of a certain employee size range in certain geographic regions. If, for example, you knock it out of the park, you do fantastic with healthcare clients, but you don't meet some of the compliance requirements for financial services, well, that may be a negative targeting parameter, or like a negative buyer persona or an exclusion parameter that you might want to set up in your go to market in terms of excluding with your outreach, your outbound using something like Sales Navigator, excluding with ads if you're using LinkedIn Campaign Manager, having drop down lists on your forms and in your CRM segmentation strategy so you can actively exclude places where you know you're just not going to win because you haven't invested the resources in getting the expertise at the intersection of a particular geographic range, a particular employee size, and especially along lines of a business model. So for the go-to-market strategy, we now have our ideal client profile defined. From there, we should be able to build out a target account list. A target account list are anywhere from a couple dozen to a couple hundred to maybe a couple thousand clients that would be phenomenal for our company to be doing business with. And this sometimes may already be sitting in a spreadsheet or in your CRM. In other cases, your head of sales, your chief revenue officer, your VP of sales, sales operations, whatever it is, will create this list and continue to maintain it over time. But this is a forcing faction. It helps you get a lot more specific about who you're creating this strategy for. It helps you have a very targeted focus on your distribution and promotion strategy. Because especially when you're talking about something as specific as being a data center operator, a lot of times there's a very tightly defined criteria for who is really qualified. There may be a slightly looser criteria for who's marginally qualified. And then there may be a huge amount of companies that are completely disqualified. So being able to get really tight around that criteria in your ideal client profile and then baking that into a target account list will serve you extremely well with both outbound prospecting as well as targeted ads using something like LinkedIn Campaign Manager or other kinds of platforms that get you in front of specific kinds of companies. And it will also help to determine when a lead is an inbound lead comes in on your website, how quickly that lead gets passed to sales and what kind of attention your sales team needs to put on it, both in terms of initial response time and the number of follow-up and connect attempts on a recurring basis because of the extreme potential financial value of that particular account. So we have a target account list now. We have an ideal client profile. Next, we need to understand who in these accounts we need to be building relationships with. These are your buyer personas. A buyer persona is a documented representation of an ideal client based on actual research and some select educated speculation. Buyer personas can't just be floating around in thin air up here and nowhere else documented. It's super critical that your buyer personas be documented somewhere in your wiki, in your CRM, in a PDF, in a Google Doc, what have you. And it should be super specific about who that person is demographically, what their biggest goals are that they're trying to achieve that help them get promoted in their job and are very favorable for their company's performance, their team's performance, their individual performance. It should also be hyper specific about their biggest challenges, the things that are stressing them out, the things that are driving nuts. And these challenges, these goals need to be in their own words. That's why it's so critical that you do the actual research, not just pull these out of thin air from Bob or Sally, who's been with your company for 5 or 10 years and swears that they have 100% of the answers. Bob and Sally probably do have some really good input, but as you may have heard me say before, Bob and Sally's input should maybe be 20 to 25% of the puzzle. The other 75, 80% of your research should come from doing actual research with people that are in those particular buyer persona segments. So once you've documented their biggest goals, their challenges, their demographics, where they hang out online and offline, what they read, what they listen to, what they watch, the conferences they attend to, the groups, the associations that they belong to, sort of particular certifications they have, those documents, those strategies are worth their weight in gold in terms of what they represent to your company's future revenue streams. Then I also would strongly recommend that you prioritize which of those buyer personas is most important, which of those buyer personas is the second most important, which is third most important. The reason that that's really critical is, especially in small and mid-sized companies where you have limited marketing and sales enablement, there's never enough hours in the day to target everyone as vigorously as you like. So to the extent that you know that a particular kind of job function is the primary point person for this kinds of initiative and is especially valuable, that should be designated priority, your primary. And it's usually based on a combination of what your product and service does, how it aligns with that person being both the economic decision maker as well as the actual user, as well as things like unit economics and sales cycle length and profitability for that particular buyer persona. However, it very rarely is the case where you have a single decision maker anymore. Most cases for colocation, wholesale, hyperscale, you have a decision committee. In some cases, a pretty large decision committee. So there's lots of different stakeholders involved. And some of those stakeholders will have similar kinds of job roles. Some of them will have very different kind of job roles. This is where having another kind of buyer persona helps you focus on what that person is looking for from your company in terms of signing on to a big data center outsourcing kind of deal. So yeah, that's where having a primary, secondary, potentially a tertiary buyer persona. So you have a strategy with content, so you have a strategy with events, you have a strategy for distribution and promotion, to winning over, educating and building trust, and spending lots of time building mind share with the most important people on that decision committee. You also may over time come up with a negative buyer persona. That's someone, when this particular job function in this kind of company shows up, it's like the kiss of death to the deal. That deal's like going straight to the deal graveyard. So we need to know who that particular person is, because one, we certainly don't want to invest a lot of sales and marketing resources. And second, to the extent that we can be aware of that person by having it listed on the drop-down list, by having it set up as an exclusion and outbound and exclusion and ad campaigns, it can really help save your, conserve your resources and save your sales team's sanity from wasting their time banging their head against the wall with the person that is probably the exact opposite of who they want to be educating and building trust with. But bear in mind with all of this, when it comes to GTM for a data center operator, we need to be aware that the way people research and make these decisions is very different today than it was as recently as 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was quite common that most prospects and future clients would spend like half of their buyer's journey with someone from your sales team, or your sales team in general. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, found that about 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before vendor contact, before sales contact. The last time that data was updated about a year or two ago, that number is now hovering around 83%. That means 83% of your prospects and clients researching, comparing options, evaluating pricing, and decision making is now over before you even get to talk with a particular prospect. And that's a really, really big challenge for companies that use a very traditional, old school kind of playbook. But it also opens up a huge opportunity for those that are able to get in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that you and your team, your client-facing team, are seen as the go-to experts in your space on anything and everything having to do with data center operations, operating a data center. This means that your sales professionals, your account executives, your sales development reps, BDRs, marketing team should be showing up more as teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, consultants, and perhaps even thought leaders, more than just transactionally focused. I'm not saying you need to immediately go in and switch out the job titles on everyone's LinkedIn profile and email signature and business cards, but there's something to be said for positioning your experts to look more like Big Four consultants and a lot more like someone that's a sales person from a traditional technology vendor that's just focused on advancing a deal, getting a deal closed, and making their quota to generate a commission. So the more you can elevate that person's perceived value to prospects and clients, the easier everything gets. Because instead of your sales and marketing efforts being focused on chasing prospects, you are now setting up a environment where your prospects and clients want to spend time with members of your sales team because they're able to get unique insights that they can't get anywhere else. How and why are they able to get these unique insights? Because of muscle memory, because of pattern recognition, because over time, your client facing team should start to see that, in the typical 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision for a person in this particular job role, in this particular industry, in this geographically region at this company size, we expect that they'll go through a journey of step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, all the way through step 28. So to the extent that we have thought through a way in our go-to-market strategy to spend as many of those 28 touch points with our ideal clients and their most important buyer personas as possible, we make it so not only is our company guaranteed to be on the short list, in many cases, we dominate and control the short list. And over time, as you start to spend the majority of those, as they're spending the majority of those 28 touch points with your company, you will start to knock out competitive alternatives. And in some cases, if you do this so exceptionally well, by the time they get to the decision stage of the buyer's journey, most or all of the competitive alternatives may have completely disappeared because all of the education, all the trust building, all of the framing, how they evaluate all the other data center operator options have been coming from the fantastic educational resources and events that they've been experiencing with the subject matter experts on your team. So again, that strongly argues for having a proactive way of educating and building trust using fantastic blogs and podcasts and videos and downloadable premium content, all different kinds of webinars. Most companies are doing a very one-dimensional webinar approach when you really should be thinking more of webinars for each of your most important buyer personas to stay with them throughout the full buyer's journey. All of that results in dramatic amounts of differentiation, sales cycle acceleration, protecting your pricing power, phenomenal benefits to getting that right in today's modern digital buyer's journey. There still are some outliers in this industry who invest a significant amount of their go-to-market budget resources in a lot of tactics that have probably seen their better days, especially over investing in offline conferences and events where there's not a really tight match between the conference attendee demographics and your ideal client profile, your buyer personas. Because at the end of the day, you can have a fantastic presence at a conference with your booth. You may sponsor a cocktail party, a cabana party, a golf tournament, whatever, but each of those only counts as one touch point. So like, okay, you spent $275,000 on this particular conference and you generated 18 great meetings, presumably of strong enough unit economics that you can actually afford it. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do for the other 26 touch points, 27 touch points to stay with them throughout the next several weeks or the next several months? So you make sure that you don't leave yourself vulnerable to a competitor that's investing more aggressively in building and nurturing these relationships with the prospects and clients that you want to become your future clients. So that's how I would approach creating an effective go-to-market strategy, effective GTM strategy for a data center operator. Generally, the bigger the target client, the more the average client value is, the more the monthly recurring, annual recurring, the deal size in general is, the more resources you can afford to invest in this in a one-to-one or highly customized kind of fashion. Generally, the lower you are in that part of the market where you're selling something that's kind of seems transactional at a much lower price point, where you've already faced commoditization at the low end of like colocation with very small businesses, then some of these may not be cost effective to do. So you really need to adjust the level at which you're investing to these based on revenue goals, based on average deal sizes, and then historic win rates, and working backwards on all of that for your key performance indicators and your SMART goals, your specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals. So again, That's how we would approach creating an effective go-to-market GTM strategy for a data center operator. Okay, next question. How does a data center power and temperature monitoring company reach decision makers? So, how can a company that's principally in the business of data center power and temperature monitoring reach decision makers? That's a fantastic question. So, now we're primarily talking about a buyer persona that's likely on the facilities management side. In a smaller enterprise data center, a smaller data center operator, where you have certain job functions wearing lots of different hats, taking on lots of different roles and responsibilities, and maybe someone more on the technology side or on the operations side, engineering kind of side. But the reality is, when it comes to power and temperature monitoring, these are usually the domain of facilities managers, facilities leaders, and then they have teams working for them in specialized areas. So you're presumably selling the software, probably at least adjacent to environmental monitoring, um, where you're looking at things like humidity and temperature level and consistency of power and the health of the battery backups and generators and other things like that that give you a continuous supply of power. So when it comes to reaching decision makers, let's first, it's really important to recognize that it's very unusual that there's a single decision maker anymore. And even if you manage to get to the decision maker, like bold caps, you're thinking that there's just one decision maker. The reality is people are more risk averse than ever. And because of that, it's very likely that even if you get to the magic person who's ultimately going to need to sign off and help the deal progress forward, that person is more than likely going to kick it back to their team of direct reports and say, here, go talk to them, explain what it is that you do. And if they're on board, I'm on board. So think in terms of a decision committee. And in order to think in terms of a decision committee, we need to get really specific about what kinds of job functions are typically on that decision committee for your category for data center power and environmental and temperature monitoring. So this is where having a primary buyer persona, a secondary buyer persona, and truly understanding the goals of each of those. What are the things that if they get right, get them a big promotion, are great for their team, are great for their company? What are some of the things if they mess up could give them an opposite of promotion? Those are the big goals. Then there's the challenges. What are the things that are stressing them out, that are driving them nuts, that are causing them to have to work all kinds of crazy emergency shifts that could be interfering with their plans for time off with their friends, family, and loved ones and ruining vacations? All those things, once you know the consensus on that, it becomes a lot easier to figure out a way to educate and build trust and around providing value around those particular topics, their biggest goals and their biggest challenges. And it's very possible that when it comes to the power and temperature monitoring category, that there may be more than one kind of stakeholder that you need to bring into the fold on these kinds of conversations. And again, a lot of this depends on your product roadmap at the intersection of their size. Because if you're selling to smaller companies, very likely a smaller sale, but a simpler sale, because you don't have to be quite as precise with all your targeting and messaging because everyone knows each other. When there's only 30 employees or 80 employees or 120 employees throughout the whole company, it's very likely that anyone that touches facilities management and your particular category of power and temperature monitoring knows who would be the right person to send this resource along to. Where when you start getting into much bigger companies where the teams have teams and the teams are huge, there's dozens or hundreds of people or more working on these teams spread across dozens of facilities, then it becomes a lot more nuanced to have that more mid-market or enterprise sale. So at the end of the day, it can be really helpful to get dialed into who these companies are, where they're located, how many employees they tend to have, are there certain industries that are better than others, and who the individuals are that we need to be building these relationships with. And from there, reaching the decision makers would be helpful as well to sit down with your sales director, your sales operations, your marketing team, and come up with a defined target account list of who would be ideal clients for your particular temperature and power and temperature monitoring solution, platform, software, whatever you want to call it, based on there may be certain attributes that they need to already be invested in to be a good fit for what you do, maybe with their DSIM or something like that, maybe with their VIM, whatever. There may be other things in place that help you predict whether someone is a good fit or not. So that should also get baked into your what your documented ideal client profile is, and for sure will impact the kind of topics that you target in creating these great resources, these great educational events for building relationships with and nurturing the people on these decision committees. So at the end of the day, for reaching decision makers, one of the most important things that people tend to overlook is that your educational resource is your foot in the door. And because it's your foot in the door, it becomes a lot easier to get someone that has downloaded, registered for, watched, attended, whatever is that particular resource is, for them to get a real simple email message back that says, "Hey, Bob, it's great to see that you downloaded our planning guide to the biggest mistakes that facilities managers make when it comes to data center power and temperature monitoring. But we know it takes a village to make this happen. Typically, on teams like this, the people that care most about this are this particular job role, that particular job role, sometimes even people in network operations and finance, health, safety, whatever, ESG. There's a lot of different ways to go with your. Again, it really depends on your competitive advantages, your product roadmap, your target size. But at any rate, they get a simple email back encouraging them to. So if there's anyone else on your team that you think should also be attending this webinar or downloading this resource or watching this webinar recording, simply hit the forward button, add a thought or two about why this matters to them, and hit send. They'll thank you. And you'd be shocked, this simple email marketing message that you've been able to do for 20 years now, one, how often people overlook it, and two, how powerful it is. And you'll know it's working because when it comes to reaching the decision committee, you look down at your CRM or whatever you're using, and you're like, wow, 4, 5, 6 people from the same company just registered, just converted on our landing page. They must be talking about us. And that's exactly what you want, because when you want to start getting your company, getting your message, getting your content, getting your events spread across multiple stakeholders from the same company, these resources, these events are a much lower risk way for them to spread what it is that you're about and your unique way of approaching all of this and your insights, and that can actually help them do their job better without them having to formally endorse your company. So by the time they get to the decision stage, they're already heavily indoctrinated with your way of looking at the world, with your way of comparing all the other data center power and temperature monitoring options that are in front of them. And that's the key to all of this, is that the more you can spend the majority of their buyer's journey with them, continuing to teach them really helpful things that help them do their job better during the awareness and the consideration stages of the buyer's journey. So by the time they get to the decision stage and they're actually sales ready, they are totally aligned with your way of looking at the world. And you'll know it's working not only because you see the conversions from the same company, but you also get to that initial meeting and they're literally quoting your resources. They've used your resources as a form of internal consulting to help them evaluate all the alternatives that are in front of them as like the methodology. They've passed around your PDF. They put it up on the screen at their weekly meetings, monthly strategy meetings. And by the time you get there, they're totally bought into everything that you've been espousing because you made these investments in wanting your client-facing team members to be seen as the biggest go-to subject matter experts, teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, and thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center power and temperature monitoring. Next question up is, how does a data center cooling company address market sizing challenges? How does a data center cooling company address market sizing challenges? That's a fantastic question. So when it comes to deciding how big or how small your addressable market is, your total addressable market or your TAM is, you first need to get really specific about what makes an ideal client for your company. Over time, this should become very apparent because as you start to grow out of product market fit and very strongly establish and contend and defend and maintain go-to-market fit. So you know exactly where you can win, where your clients are most successful with your cooling solutions. It will come into focus very specific factors around who should be your next clients. That helps you back into an ideal client list. From there, you can build a target account list, which is often used for account-based marketing, account-based selling, or however you want to name that. And that target account list is your first pass at getting super specific about sizing the potential market. And usually the factors that are in your ideal client profile and your target account list are at the intersection of a geographic region where you can do well with marketing, selling, and supporting these kinds of data center cooling solutions. Realistically, this has to do with your capabilities, your capital, where you have footprint and presence. Can you really sell these cooling solutions globally? Or is it only in a specific region of the world? Or perhaps it's only in a certain country or a certain part of that country. Get really specific about where your company can win when it comes to marketing and selling and supporting these, installing and providing ongoing support of these cooling systems. Next, get very self-aware about the company sizes that are the best fit for your cooling companies. Usually when it comes to that particular category within facilities, data center facilities, you'll have a minimum where you know the client needs to be a certain size to really be able to afford your entry level options for data center cooling. So more than likely you'll exclude companies that are really small, that are resource constrained. And there may also be an upper limit on where your company can do well, because beyond a certain company size, perhaps their needs are better met by other players in the market, or you're just not ready to be able to service a client that has 100,000 employees or even 10,000 employees. So again, get really self-aware about geographic coverage, get really self-aware about where you do best in terms of your client's size. Think about Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, just right. Not too big, not too small, but just right. And only you can answer what that band, what that range of employees is, but it has an enormous impact on how you go about targeting and sizing the market. And then there's also probably certain industries where you do better than others. And this is where, again, looking at where you've been most successful, looking at your logos, looking at your case studies, your reviews, your testimonials should be a real eye-opener for whether there's certain kinds of business models or industries or vertical markets where your data center cooling solutions play better than others. At a high level too, even within this space, do you do well with both operators and enterprise data centers, or do you do proportionally better in one over the other? In other words, company-owned, premise-based kind of approaches versus more outsourced operator kind of approaches? Or are you equally skilled, equally adept at marketing, selling, installing, servicing solutions on your data center cooling on an ongoing basis, regardless of whether it's an enterprise data center or a data center operator? So in terms of addressing market sizing challenges, I think that's a really good place to start, is getting hyper specific about who they are at a company level, building out your target account list of where you think you can win, having an idea based on your product roadmap of where you know you can win based on your current capabilities and capabilities that'll be coming live in the coming weeks and in the coming months. And also look at your footprint for your team resources for being able to market and sell and install and service your kind of cooling solutions effectively. All that will drive you to have a much tighter idea of the addressable market. From there, you may even be able to back into the average deal size based on different employee size bands and come up with the total potential market of which you want to have some kind of market share. And depending on how far along you are in your business, you may already have some thoughts on progressing on that and have a realistic idea of where you want to head with market share when all said and done. So those are my thoughts on how a data center cooling company can address market sizing challenges.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you're watching our weekly live stream, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the full data center ecosystem. So next question up for this week is, how can data center sales teams create trust with a long-term approach? So thinking long-term, how can data center sales teams create trust? That's an excellent question. Here's why. Whenever consumer and business research organizations try to figure out among different professions who are the most trusted and who are the least trusted, most trusted comes up with things like members of the military, primary school teachers, nurses. On the least trusted, they're not specifically going after data center sales professionals in general, but you can be relatively certain that in the world we live in, sales professionals definitely have a hard time being trusted for a variety of reasons. So we need to set your sales team up to be seen in a very different light so that they can be successful in having strong positive interactions with your prospects and clients. And one of the most effective ways to do this is to make sure that your sales team is able to move beyond transactional thinking. What does that mean? In a lot of ways, the data center sales team of today and of the near future needs to be seen more like Big Four consultants, as if they worked for PwC or EY or KPMG or Deloitte, that was basically being brought in as a $500 an hour or $1,000 an hour consultant, providing exceptionally strong value to their particular prospects, except they're doing this for free in the context of something that presumably leads to a sales opportunity, at least in some of the cases, where your sales team, your client-facing sales team, are taking a very proactive role in educating and building trust with prospects and clients. In many cases, veteran data center sales professionals often believe that the role of educating and nurturing and building trust is the domain of marketers. The reality is, 10 years ago, they could afford to have that attitude. Today, not so much. Why? Because prospects and clients have become really, really allergic to spending time with your sales team. It used to be 10 years ago that your sales team got to spend like half of a typical buyer's journey with prospects and clients. Now we live in a world where the self-driven buyer's journey is the predominant buyer's journey. And what that means is that typically most of the research and comparing options decision-making is over before your sales professionals get to meet with prospects. Like Gartner found 83% of a typical buyer's journey is over before vendor contact. And this creates a lot of challenges and struggles for traditional salespeople that have been using the same playbook for the last 10, 20, 30 years. But it also opens up a lot of opportunities for those that are open and flexible enough to recognize that there is a much better way going forward to position their sales teams so that their sales teams are seen as teachers, subject matter experts, consultants, trusted advisors, and perhaps even thought leaders. So what this means is the level of upskilling that's necessary is going to probably look very different than the level of upskilling that someone would have needed to have in this role 10 years ago. It's just a fact of from a practical standpoint, what needs to be done in the marketplace. There will also, among your sales team, likely be a wide variance of levels of expertise that are especially interesting to your prospects and clients. The more seasoned senior members of your team that are more technical, they could rise all the way to the level of being seen as thought leaders, where they're out in front, they're on webinar panels, they're speaking at conferences, they either have their own podcast or they're constantly interviewed on other people's podcasts, they guest blog, and they show up to help support your marketing events, your prospect events, and your client events by sharing all of their wisdom and expertise around your particular category within the data center industry. So that's one extreme. At the other extreme is the entry-level sales professional that often starts in a sales development, an SDR or business development, BDR rep kind of role. And in that particular case, you want to look at what you can do as a company to improve your onboarding experience, improve the professional development, the cross-training, the cross-skilling. Because early on, sure, that's important, but it may be that for the first 3-6 months to a year that particular person is working in the data center industry, their best value to your company may be approaching this as like a tour guide or a concierge of the other expert resources that are within your company, but they're still actively involved. Again, this is a big change in mindset because historically, a lot of the educational resources, a lot of the educational events were things that were done 100% by marketers. It's more important than ever for your AEs, your account executives, your SDRs, and your BDRs to partner with marketing now to take an active role in these kinds of initiatives. It doesn't have to be a huge time investment. It could be as little as 30 minutes to an hour a couple times a month. Again, not a huge investment, but it can provide enormous leverage and positioning and differentiation so that your sales teams are able to effectively educate and build trust with their most important prospects and clients because they've turned the corner and their prospects and clients will no longer see that particular salesperson just wants to get a deal closed at any cost. It's constantly pushing for things that are in their interest, but not necessarily in the client's interest. When you're able to create the environment where your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your sales team because they see their consultative approach, their expertise being incredibly valuable, it's game changing for the whole balance of power. It's game changing for sales cycle acceleration, neutralizing competitive options, protecting product margin, morale of your company's profitability. Like 10 or 12 really core important things improve when you start to adopt this mindset and you start to see this playing out. Because again, with like 20, 26, 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, the more your client facing team, especially your sales team members, can be involved in being the ones who are helping to educate and build trust, shape the criteria, share unique insights about not just the question they're asking right now, but what step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through step 26, 27, and 28 look like based on this particular person's job function in a company of this size, in a company in this industry, and a company in this geographic region. Those 3 or 4 parameters, because you and your sales team have seen the pattern recognition of how others have navigated these journeys, this can be incredibly valuable to the right kinds of prospects and clients. But these, for the most part, are major cultural changes for a lot of sales teams, especially within the data center industry. So to really get it right, it's super important that most of the buy-in, most of the taking charge on this kind of initiative start from the top down. If your company is relatively small, I'd say relatively small being a few dozen or maybe up to 150 or 200 employees, this kind of initiative really should start at the CEO level. For significantly larger, because again, if this is so strategically important for your goals to be seen as the go-to definitive experts in your space about anything and everything having to do with data center stuff, if you can't get a half hour of time from the CEO to show up to a strategy meeting once a month to talk about how important this is and demonstrate by actions more than just words, and that he or she is adopting a similar kind of mindset in everything that they do, it's really tough to get that to filter down. In much larger companies, this would typically be the internal champion might be a chief commercial officer, a CCO, a chief revenue officer, in some cases, a chief sales officer, chief marketing officer. But again, this is for a lot of companies, this is such a big change that it really needs to start from the top down because you're changing the culture. And you also need to be realistic that because you're making big changes, it can take time. So start with reasonable pilot targets of a handful of people on your sales team that are adopting this. they're able to see success, you're able to document success, quota attainment, better margin, better forecastability, pipeline generation, all that stuff, then it'll become a lot easier for the for it to spread to the rest of the sales team and eventually to the late adopters or the laggards with all of this. But yeah, for sure, they always say with digital transformation, the people part is the most difficult part. But the reality is we now live in a world where especially cynical IT buyers are more anti-sales, averse to spending time with your sales team than ever. If they can get a self-service resource and avoid that human contact, they will. So we need to work extra hard for your sales team to be able to be seen as the go-to experts in your space. And they should really be seen more as advisors and consultants and way less as focused on a particular transaction. Host a podcast. We've gotten into this topic many, many times over the last several weeks, especially in data center operators where the sales teams really need to be able to have great conversations with like CTOs. Because that's the key to being able to get in the door and stay in the door and not get thrown out by the CTOs, being able to add insight and value at that level to help them figure out what their true needs are. In some cases, the sales professionals are taking a strong nights and weekends kind of approach, building these amazing lab setups at home where it almost looks like they have a mini data center going on in their home office. In some cases, they're upskilling using the company's tuition reimbursement or professional development budget. In some cases, they're supplementing this with formal certifications. In some cases, it's less formal. But either way, at the end of the day, in order for your sales professionals to become more trusted with a long-term approach, they need to be able to add a lot more value to their prospects and clients' research, comparing options, and decision-making process. And again, showing up more like a Big Four consultant and a lot less like a traditional sales professional. Along the same lines, too, when it comes to post-purchase, in a lot of companies, you have account managers and customer success managers that report to a CRO because they're focused on expansion revenue and cross sells and upsells and customer marketing and stuff like that. In that particular context, those folks in the post-purchase kind of account management standpoint should be seen like the PhD version or the MBA, Master's of Business Administration kind of version of that trusted advisor, of that expert consultant. And some companies too, they have like solution engineers and sales engineers that are next level in the pre-sales process. But at the end of the day, the trust comes from being able to add value to how your clients are going through and how your prospects are going through their research and decision-making process. And by definition, the more time that you can spend with them, the more likely it is that you're going to find out what's really going on, that you're going to be invited to sit on their side of the metaphorical table, so that you're an invited guest as opposed to having to nag them constantly for attention. And wow, is that an enormous, enormous game-changing positioning differentiator and growth factor for your individual sales professionals, their team, and your company at a 30,000 foot level. Next question up is, how can a small scale data center with less than 100 racks sell shared colocation services? How does a small scale colocation data center, less than 100 racks, successfully sell colocation services? So what it largely comes down to is this is probably what most people would consider retail colocation, but it could be wholesale if you're selling big enough blocks, if you're selling like full cabinets or multi-cabinets. It largely comes down to figuring out what you can do to properly segment your prospects and clients based on their size and your perception of what their rack cabinet overall requirements would look like. Are they a client that's going to spend a few $100s a month or your local currency equivalent with you? Or are they a client that could potentially be spending tens of thousands of dollars with your company, taking up a significant part of those 100 racks? Over time, you should start to see commonalities among the different kinds of clients who fall into one of those two extremes. Now, the client that just needs a rack, just needs a unit, a couple of units of space, a piece of a cabinet, versus needing several cabinets, several racks, or potentially a whole suite, depending on how you're set up. So Once you start to see that pattern recognition, you'll be able to segment better. And when you segment better, you can adjust your playbook, you can adjust the amount of resources that you put into different kinds of segments. For a lot of companies, they may find below a certain size that it's just not practical to have a dedicated sales team for clients that are purchasing deals that are that small. So, what do they do for those really small cases? They may make it self sign up, kind of self onboarding, self service as much as possible on the website so they can go through this process and sign up without consuming a lot of sales resources, in which cases it becomes a marketing challenge or it becomes a marketing opportunity to figure out a way to improve the website so that the entry level point in your colocation can be sold as not much different than selling like dedicated web hosting. Along the same lines, you may also come to the conclusion that for these really small deals, that channel partners like managed service providers or web hosting companies or something like that could be a great fit, because they may be interested in these small deals where, again, it's not cost effective necessarily for your own internal sales team. Why would they be interested in these deals? Because in many cases, they're selling a lot of services way beyond just the small amount of colocation that they need from your company. And this is just a way for them to maintain account control and be that single point of contact for their SMB clients, their small and medium-sized business clients, for anything and everything having to do with their category of what they do for that particular company. So again, say, for example, you're in the US and they only need a couple $100 worth of colocation, but that particular client that they're bringing in may be spending $5,000 a month on professional services. So they're happy to have that to be running and managing, provisioning that particular colocation and being the remote hands, or just the hands in general, who are in charge of that server or servers. But the reality is, the reason they're willing to do that, even though it would not be cost effective for your sales team to get involved in that process, is because there's a much larger opportunity for them to sell recurring and ongoing project-based professional services to that particular client. So those are some of my thoughts on how a small-scale data center operator with less than 100 racks can profitably sell colocation services. First, segment out by company size and their needs, who's profitable to sell to and who's really not profitable to sell to based on the resources that you're putting into it with your existing account executives, sales development reps, whoever else is on your sales team. At what point it makes sense for them to get involved, whereas it doesn't make sense to get involved. For the smaller deals, think about having an e-commerce approach where they can sign up for colocation, not much differently than they'd sign up for like dedicated web hosting, dedicated server type of approach. And you may also find too that there's some great channel partners like website developers, software developers, and mobile app developers, managed service providers that are in your local community who would love to be able to get in on those deals or even referred on those deals, because they're able to invest a lot more time pre-sales in that opportunity than you can, because there's a much larger deal that wraps around additional value-added services that they're providing way beyond just the colocation. So as we head down the home stretch on this week's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A show, for our final question, just a quick reminder that if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming virtual events like this and other similar kinds of educational resources, make sure that you're subscribed to our data center sales and marketing email newsletter that comes directly to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So question number 6, the final question for this week is, how do we get structured cabling decision makers to be on board faster? How do we get to the structured cabling decision maker faster, even if that initial person has an entry level title? So your company provides structured cabling. I don't really know whether that's the only thing you provide or whether structured cabling is one of many things you provide, but you're running the sales process primarily focused on a structured cabling sales opportunity. And there's a decision maker, but it sounds like you're having trouble getting to that decision maker fast enough. How do we get to the decision maker faster, especially if your initial contact is at a more junior, more entry level? I think what it largely comes down to is recognizing that most of your prospects and clients for structured cabling really don't want to spend a lot of time with sales professionals anymore. Gartner, for example, found across the broad B2B spectrum that 83% of a typical buyer's journey is over before vendor contact, before sales contact. That means most of the researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing are now happening in a self-driven, self-propelled buyer's journey. So from a practical standpoint, your prospects and clients for structured cabling, they're doing tons of searches on traditional search engines. They're using their large language models, their ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, Perplexity, Gemini to do tons of research before they get to you. They're watching YouTube videos. They're listening to podcasts. They're attending webinars. They're going to review websites. They're asking their peers. In other words, they're going everywhere possible to avoid having to spend time with your sales team. The way to get out of the doghouse, the way to get back into those awareness and consideration stage conversations that you used to be able to get an active role in 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you got to spend about half of a typical journey with prospects and clients. Now it's down to like 10, 15%. So you don't have much surface area anymore by default. However, there is a way to turn the tables on all this to stack the decks in your favor. The way to do that is for your client-facing team to show up as the go-to experts on anything and everything having to do with structured cabling. So they show up as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and perhaps even thought leaders on anything and everything that's relevant to structured cabling at the intersection of a particular kind of client based on where they're located, their size, their industry, their business model. And to the extent that you're able to publish and promote these amazing premium content resources and have these amazingly helpful educational events, both virtual events and potentially in-person events, you get to dramatically improve the know, like, and trust that prospects and clients feel about members of your client-facing team. So they see your client-facing team members more like they would hold in the esteem of someone that's like from a big four consultant firm that's doing $500 to $1,000 an hour kind of consulting, except they're getting access to this kind of expertise because you're investing in training your own team members to be able to operate more as consultants than transaction-focused sales professionals. That doesn't necessarily mean you should immediately go in and change the job titles on email signatures, on LinkedIn profiles, and on business cards. But the mindset of your sales professionals being able to add value at that level is a very, very real opportunity, and not addressing it is a very real vulnerability. Because by being able to show up early and often, by being able to have a presence in as many of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, you and your team are able to have a dramatic impact on how the decision committee, how the decision maker look at all of the options that are in front of them when it comes to things that are directly and indirectly related to structured cabling. You can do this so well that when you are dominating, having the majority of those 26, 28 touch points, your team having a role in there, you'll start to gradually eliminate competitive options. So when they get to the point that they're truly in market, as many people call it, or in that last 5 or 10% of the buyer's journey, you may have literally suffocated the air supply for your competitive forces to be involved in that sales opportunity. Or at the minimum, you've maybe narrowed it down to the short list being you may be in one other company. But there's cases too where your content, the relationship building, the education that you're doing during that sales process is so next level that they come to the conclusion that your company is the only option. You've basically collapsed the short list down to your company being the short list, the only obvious option at that point. So that's really a really important part of the approach, is to recognize how much the buyer's journey has changed. It's a great opportunity for those that are able to get in early and often and be seen as the go-to experts in the space. But it's an enormous problem for companies that are very resistant to this and are continuing to use the same sales and marketing playbook that they have for the last 10 or 15 years. Another big factor too with getting from the entry level person on the decision committee to the true decision maker. Let's be realistic. In most cases, for a significant size opportunity, it's actually a decision making committee as opposed to a decision maker. Even if you manage to get to that decision maker early on, people are just so risk averse, so anti-sales. In most cases, they're just going to kick it back and say, Yeah, we probably do have a need, but you go meet with John and the rest of the team. Go meet with Susan and the rest of the team, and they'll figure out if your company it can actually help us. So you have to go back and win them over anyway. So that's where having individual buyer personas of understanding each of their motivations, each of their goals, each of their challenges, and having great resources to help them do their job better, navigate around all the challenges and frustrations they're feeling with their current approach to structured cabling. That can be really game changing. It also, the educational resources, the educational events that you're doing are also very conducive to spreading your content, spreading your messaging, spreading your value among multiple members of the decision committee. So let's say, for example, that there's an internal champion. The initial contact didn't, the initial lead that you generated based on an inbound on your website, however, was someone that was pretty entry level. Maybe even they're an intern, but the internal champion sent them to go do research. Do you stop there and say, well, this lead sucks because it's only the intern and I'm not getting to the internal champion, let alone the decision maker? No, it's a really simple, for starters, that person will be able to give you will, in most cases, as long as you win them over with your great resources and that they're learning quite a bit, they will likely be able to point you in the direction of who told them to go do this research. Second, your basic email marketing automation that you've been able to do for now 10 or 20 years, like somebody downloads your planning guide, downloads your templates, registers for your webinar, registers to watch your webinar recording, registers to attend your breakfast event, whatever it is. They get back a really simple marketing automation message that says, John, who else should read this? Sally, who else needs to attend this? Oh, when it comes to structured cabling for manufacturing companies in the Midwest, we find that it truly takes a village to make this all possible, to provide phenomenal connectivity and use information technology as a strategic competitive weapon. Along the same lines, we typically see stakeholders from operation, finance, whatever, like 5, 6 different roles that are typically involved in these kinds of initiatives. With that in mind, is there someone else who also should be watching this or attending this or reading this? If so, simply hit the forward button on your email client and put down a thought or two of why this matters and hit the forward button. Trust me, they'll thank you. That simple email nurturing that you've been able to do for 20 years, you'd be shocked. One, how many companies, how many of your competitors overlook this? And second, how ridiculously effective it is of getting multiple people from the same company to convert on your landing page to download the resource, register for the webinar, watch the video, whatever it is that's your gated experience. And you'll know it's working because you start to see multiple conversions coming in all from the same company within a relatively short period of time, within a matter of minutes, hours, maybe at the most a day or two. And what you don't realize, however, is now that multiple people on that decision committee know about your great approach to all this and your way of framing this and helping to understand what's truly going on in a mid-market manufacturing company's structured cabling needs in the Midwest United States, or whatever you've customized and targeted this for, they're going to start talking about you. And that's the first domino to falling of getting presence on the decision committee, because it's so much lower risk for the internal champion, whatever it is, the initial person that found you, to simply forward along this resource than it is for them to formally endorse your company. And the more you can be getting multiple people within that company to be vociferous, to be really, really strong consumers of loving your content, the more it is they start to fall in love with your brand, and the more they are like, who created this? This is amazing. I totally finally get it. Oh, they do structured cabling too? Yeah, we totally need to talk to them. And you'll know that this is working not only because you saw the footprint of this sitting in your marketing conversions, your lead notification emails, whatever it is, but you go into that first meeting and they're literally quoting your resources that they used. Your methodology essentially became what they've been talking about for weeks as they've planned this initiative. So that's how you win. That's how a structured cabling company can get to decision makers faster, even if that initial person has an entry level title. So that was our final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. Make sure that you're subscribed to our data center sales and marketing newsletter, which you can sign up for directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and make sure to mention that you watched our data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A live stream. Also, feel free to reach out or comment on this if you have an idea for a question that we should address in an upcoming episode of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. Until next time, Joshua Feinberg, wish you great success in growing your career, growing your team's impact, and growing your company in and around the data center ecosystem. Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.